Hi, my name is Joe, and welcome to one of the less weird corners of the internet. This is Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories, a storytelling podcast and now YouTube channel where my best friend Morgan and I scour the internet and our inboxes for weird, funny, embarrassing, ridiculous, sometimes absolutely humiliating stories. And then we turn them into 20-minute bedtime stories with happy endings to help you take your mind off of whatever is stressing you out and give you something positive to think about in this crazy world that feels like it's all falling apart. So we're not sure how you got here, but thank you for being here. And if you would like to subscribe, and share to all of your relatives, including the ones that you only speak to on the internet, we'd really appreciate it. Today's story for our Halloween theme is completely ridiculous and in so many ways really is the crux of why Morgan and I started doing this. We are both overwhelmed, sensitive, stressed out women who somehow relax by listening to true crime. And I'm sure my therapist would have a field day with that one, but that's where we are. After too much true crime or too many horror stories, our brains go into terrible, dark, weird, freaky places. Surprise, surprise. And we wanted something to listen to that was still storytelling. It was still true, so our brains didn't get all bitchy and go, but that didn't really happen. But it was positive. They gave us a happy ending and took our brains out of a terrible nightmare of what ifs and worst case scenarios and brought ourselves to a place where things could seem happy and not that big of a deal. This is called There's Something in the Wall, and this is a true story that went viral on YouTube, and we took it and ran with it. But all the plot points are true. So sit back, relax, do the laundry, ignore your relatives, go for your walk, do whatever it is that you need to do to hopefully just put your brain in a slightly happier place than when you started this podcast. Here you go. Shauna is a millennial through and not about to apologize for it. She loves athleisure, trending water bottles, gentle parenting, getting her daily steps in, and her not-so-secret obsession, true crime, particularly podcasts. Shauna's 9-to-5 is called Structure, a business she started from the ground up, renovating old houses in North Dakota. She documents her before and after photos on social media, has 3 admittedly adorable children, and likes nothing more than putting in her headphones and listening to an episode where she tries to solve a murder while installing hardwood flooring. She has to remember not to press her sander down too hard right before they catch the perp. Shauna enjoys her days, her family, and her business. But sometimes the dark, gory, and kind of traumatic podcasts get into her head, and Shauna finds herself lying in bed, awake in the middle of the night, suspicious of every creak and groan emanating from her 100-year-old farmhouse. Early in September of last year, while cleaning up the dinner dishes as their kids fought over the remote, Shauna recounted that day's episode to Whit, her husband of almost a decade. But I knew it was the neighbor all along. Yeah, Whit replied, paying very little attention to the horror of whatever grisly murder that Shauna was so casually reporting. You should have been in the FBI, babe. Now, Shauna wasn't an idiot and knew that Whit was being kind of a dick, but she'd been feeling like she missed her calling as a detective for some time now. She'd been obsessed with one series after the other and swore that she'd figured out the killer long before the official investigators ever did. In the middle of caulking or painting or wiring, she'd yell out at the top of her lungs, "Check the husband!" or "It's the gardener!" generally scaring the shit out of her construction crew. A lot of the guys who worked with Shauna were deeply superstitious, and her outbursts would rattle the dude using a circle saw or nail gun, and were most definitely becoming a personal injury liability. "Stop listening to that garbage," Jorge, the foreman, would instruct Shauna as she installed a new ceiling beam. But Shauna couldn't. The podcast put her in the work zone, made the time go by, and occupied a different part of her brain than her hands-on labor. And if she were being honest, she was kind of addicted. Her heart would race when the narrator described the scene in the investigation, and her brain would crank out its own list of possible suspects. The only ones she disliked were the unsolved ones. Those offended Shauna's sense of justice. She was okay with the horrifying tales, but she needed to know that in the end, justice was served. Jorge thought it put bad energy out into the world to be entertained by other people's pain. Shauna did not like this categorization at all. Here, Jorge took her phone, pulling up the purple square app, and typed in a couple of words. "Listen to this instead. This won't cause any harm." While Jorge may have thought he was saving Shauna from her downward spiral of true crime horror and opening up her mind to brighter horizons, he just substituted one addiction for another. Because Jorge introduced Shauna to stories of the supernatural. It wasn't long before Shauna's post-dinner conversations revolved around alien encounter conspiracies, historical haunting stories, and tales of spiritual reincarnation. Whit wasn't exactly entertained. "You don't really believe this stuff," he crinkled his forehead while drying the casserole dish. "No, of course not," Shauna lied while moving plates around the bottom rack of the dishwasher. "Do I believe this stuff?" she wondered that night in bed as she put her mouth guard in to fend off her nighttime teeth grinding. The dentist had told her on multiple occasions that she needed to do a better job of decompressing before she slept, or she'd be toothless by 50. Shauna knew that she needed to focus more attention on relaxing and relieving stress. But the truth was, that wasn't really her jam. Sure, the idea of sitting in some lavender-scented bubble bath while reading a romance novel sounded like a great way to spend an evening. But ripping out that old bathtub and replacing the rusty plumbing while listening to an in-depth reporting of how Bugliosi prosecuted Charles Manson sounded way more appealing to her. Shauna thought, in her own way, that Jorge's podcast was a step in the right direction because people weren't getting hurt. Even the alien abduction stories, while sure, in some cases, ruined people's lives because of the obvious stigma of telling your neighbors that little gray men came out of the sky and invited you into a flying saucer for rectal examination, isn't the greatest way to become the most popular person on the block. But it wasn't what Shauna would classify as tragic. Shauna ruminated over her choice of audio entertainment as she got ready in the morning, pulling on her favorite army green carpenter jeans and steel-toed boots. So, the question remained, did she believe the stories? Well, kind of. There's no way that humans were the only intelligent life in the universe, right? Statistically, that would seem highly, highly improbable. And Shauna dealt with people all day. She questioned whether humanity was really as smart as it gave itself credit for. And what about the supernatural stories? The tales of witches and warlocks and people who seemed to be able to communicate with the dead? Well, Shauna first started listening to Jorge's episodes. She looked down on those people and enjoyed laughing at them as she laid kitchen tile or caulked a bathroom. But after binging hours of this type of content, Shauna found herself slowly convinced that there was just as much evidence proving a spiritual afterlife as there was disproving it. And what about monsters? Now that's where Shauna drew the line. But that didn't make the stories any less entertaining. Bigfoot, Loch Ness, the Yeti. Those sightings and conspiracies made the day go by just as quickly as her old true crime favorite. However, Shauna didn't find them as truthfully compelling. That is, of course, until a Tuesday night in late October. As the groves of aspen trees shed their leaves, carpeting the ground in a satisfying crunch, the days quickly grew darker, shorter, and colder. Shauna and Whit had let their daughter, Mabel, talk them into carving a dozen pumpkins, which now adorned their covered porch. She'd also talked the couple into adding a new member to the family, a husky puppy named Echo, who talked more than Mabel. And Shauna liked Echo. See, their 100-year-old farmhouse was a work in progress, with way too many rooms for Whit and Shauna to monitor. As Echo trailed Mabel everywhere, usually howling or whining at something, it was easy to know where their only child was playing. Now, if Shauna were being totally honest, her switch from true crime podcasts to supernatural ones wasn't really helping her sleep better. Sounds that made Shauna's hair stand on end escaped from all corners of the house as the temperatures dropped drastically at night. They'd shake Shauna from a dream that occasionally involved some kind of ghost or mystical creature. And that is what happened on this particular October 9th, the 29th, a day before Halloween, which just happened to be a full, shockingly orange harvest moon. The ironwood, ponderosa, and cottonwoods had all been in need of pruning over the summer, but both Shauna and Whit had been way too busy with work and Mabel and the basement renovation to take the time to cut them back. Shauna chastised herself over this lapse as she lay in their bed, listening to the leafless branches scrape against the side of the farmhouse, like an old lady's fingernails against the thick window panes. The wind was fierce that night, and Shauna crossed her fingers that it wouldn't take down a power line because she had way too much work planned for the following day. Somewhere downstairs, Echo howled at the moon, his tone ringing through the ancient walls. Then another sound made Shauna jerk her head toward the door. She felt her heartbeat quicken, jumping to her now tight throat. It was Mabel. "Mom?" Her voice trembled. That sound sent a chill through Shauna's bones. The joke in the family was that Mabel could sleep through an earthquake. Even as a baby, Shauna learned that she could build nursery furniture a mere 3 feet from her infant and not wake the sleeping girl. Maybe it was Shauna's prolific use of power tools while Mabel was in utero. Whatever it was, nothing could wake her when she was out for the night. So to say it was unusual to have Mabel pad into her parents' room in the middle of the night was an understatement. "I can't sleep." Shauna reached out and pulled her strong little daughter into her bed. She couldn't explain it, but something felt weird. "What is it, honey?" She tried to keep her voice as even and non-alarmist as possible, but that's certainly not how she felt on the inside. "Something is making a really loud noise in my room, in my wall. I think it's a monster." Now, who knows if Shauna would have laughed this off had it not been the night before Halloween in a very old home with a howling dog, a full moon, branches that sounded like hands scraping across her windows, and her head was not chock full of very detailed stories of the otherworldly. We don't know. What we do know is that Shauna took the baseball bat from her closet and walked down the old hallway, floorboards groaning under every step, to Mabel's room. And the sound she heard in there vibrated through her entire body, turning her blood to ice. There was a noise coming from the wall, a noise loud enough to wake Mabel Turner Johnson. And the noise sounded as though, well, it really didn't want to be in there. The rational part of Shauna's brain momentarily peeked its meek little head out. It has to be an animal, Shauna told herself and then repeated out loud to Mabel. But it didn't sound like any animal that Shauna had ever met while living in her landlocked northern state. It wasn't a scratching or a whining like a squirrel or raccoon or possum. No, it was a hum, a groan that seemed to vibrate through the unicorn-clad room, and it felt like it was talking to them. Shauna grabbed Mabel's hand and dashed back into her room, shaking a snoring wit awake with a start. "It has to be an animal," he insisted after groggily half listening to Shauna and Mabel's breathless story. "Your head is full of those crazy podcasts. Of course you think there's something creepy in the wall." He pulled his gray army sweatshirt off the floor and over his head, turning to his young daughter. "There isn't," he told her gently. "That stuff isn't true," he insisted, looking up at Shauna with a tone conveying that he didn't want to hear about any supernatural theories on this particular midnight. Mother and daughter each took one of Whit's hands and walked him down the crackling hallway and into her room. And what he heard there was undeniable. Whit didn't show how creepy the sound made him feel. He refused to believe that there was anything more than a perfectly boring and logical explanation for whatever it was. But the sound was real. It was a deep vibration, as if a very baritone voice was in a lot of pain. And it definitely wasn't a rodent or a bird. But it also didn't sound quite human. He walked over to the wall and banged his fist against the wood, feigning confidence. But that backfired. The noise got louder. Whit jumped back. Sensing his unease, Mabel and Shauna gripped each other's hands so very tightly. Shauna's mind started digging, of course, a tunnel of its own. She imagined a corpse behind her daughter's wall, decomposed between the insulation for who knows how many years. She imagined his tortured spirit holding on to some kind of rare or very important secret, now ready to claw his way through the sheetrock and into their lives. It was at that moment that Shauna would have sworn she smelled rotting flesh, and the goosebumps on her arm were so hard that her skin began to ache. But her maternal instinct managed to stop her imagination from spiraling any further. "My camera," she eked out to Whit. "What?" He looked at her so intently that, for the first time in their 8-year marriage, Shauna could see the true fear in his eyes. I. Shauna's brain grasped for the word. Remember, she was a contractor. She had a lot of tools and a lot of various contraptions. One of those happened to be a thermal camera. It wasn't a strange thing to own in her profession. She would use it to inspect a roof for leaks or detect moisture or a missing shingle. Shauna tried to focus on the practical uses of the device as she flew down the old stairs into her storage closet and pulled out the camera. She pressed the power button, a mixture of relief and pure, unadulterated fear when she saw that it was charged and working, and brought it back to Mabel's room. The picture that appeared on the digital screen sent shockwaves of chills through her spine. The camera showed something behind the wall, something in a shape that looked vaguely human. And yes, it was alive because it was giving off heat. The yellow and red outline stretched 6 feet to the ceiling, glowing through the small monitor. It seemed to have one leg, a large, thick torso, and no discernible head. For the second time that night, Shauna saw something in Whit for the first time. He had no idea what to do. He stood in the room, bare feet gripping into Mabel's lavender shag carpet, the walls illuminated by the menacing full moon and the bright Hello Kitty lamp on her bedside table. The moaning in the wall was impossible to ignore. "It has to be an animal," Whit insisted, with absolutely zero conviction. "Mabes, you can sleep in our room tonight." That should have been a joke, because not one of them slept for a single minute. The 3 of them tossed and turned and pretended that they were alone. But they weren't. The dawn crept over the house like a slow-leaking liquid, slipping into the cracks and holes, filling the house with a suffocating gray gloom that felt heavy on its inhabitants. Bleary-eyed, Shauna and Whit looked at each other, across their daughter, sound asleep in the center of their bed. Shauna spoke first. "We punch a hole in the wall, small enough that nothing can get out. So many of these boards are totally rotten, it has to be some kind of nest." With the sleep deprivation and the honest-to-God fear in his heart, Whit wasn't sure what to say. Maybe they should call the exterminator, animal control, a freaking conjurer or exorcist. He kept those thoughts to himself. "Yeah, okay, sledgehammer." Shauna nodded and wiggled her arm out from under Mabel. She wished she could control how fast her heart was beating. Standing in Mabel's room in the freezing morning air, wrapped in her bathrobe and work gloves, Shauna looked at the wall. "It's much quieter," she whispered to Whit, who nodded in agreement. "Where are you going to punch it?" Shauna gestured to the thermal camera laying on Mabel's rumpled bedspread. She must have tossed it there in fear some hours earlier. "I guess at the bottom, where there was the least amount of heat?" Shauna heard her voice quiver. "Unless it moved," Whit ventured. The thought of being that close to an unknown living being that was living mere feet from where her only daughter slept creeped her out more than she could articulate. "Here it goes." Shauna swung her arms back, gripping the heavy tool with everything she had while instinctively closing her eyes and smashing the steel end into the wall. And that's when the quiet hum got loud, and then louder, and then something escaped from the hole. The cacophony of sound momentarily stunned both Shauna and Whit. The crash of the sledgehammer woke up Mabel, who came running into the room, screaming. And what she saw was the last thing she expected. Bees. Honeybees, to be specific. The largest swarm any of them had ever seen. The family booked it to the door, slamming it behind them. They didn't start laughing right away. No. It took minutes that felt like hours for the adrenaline to drain from their bodies. Even Mabel had been up most of the night, stressed to the nth degree about what could possibly be living in the ancient walls of the historical farmhouse. But when they were finally able to relax, the laughter was contagious. They laughed through breakfast, through Saturday morning cartoons, and were still laughing when the beekeeper arrived with a truck and tools to cajole their extra thousands of uninvited house guests into a new hive. Shauna sipped her 3rd cup of coffee and watched in awe as the beekeeper found the queen, put her in a clip, and then allowed her workers to follow her into the box. A little handheld smoker helped them along. As the bees left in the back of a Chevy pickup, the family watched them out their kitchen window as Mabel waved goodbye. "I didn't know that monsters are really bees. That's interesting." And Mabel went back to her cartoons. And she took a few days off, but by that Wednesday, Shauna was back to her true crime podcast. She's also now on a mission to tear out all the old insulation and fill her walls with the new stuff, leaving zero room for anything or anyone to set up a home in her walls. And she's looking for lighter, funnier stories to keep in her earbuds as she installs cabinets and countertops. So please, leave suggestions here in the comments. And sweet dreams.
Thanks for listening to Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories. We're here to help you take your mind off whatever is making you spiral by listening to a story about someone else's hilarious or mortifying experience. And we know you have your own. Please DM or email your stories of bad decisions, miscommunications, and Murphy's Law. Your support helps us keep doing what we love. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. And as always, sweet dreams. This episode was written and recorded by Joe Newman with editing and sound design by Morgan Walsh.